We've all heard it. And if we're honest, at some point, we've probably said something like this: I'm a fill in the blank learner. And you know what? I'm guilty of it myself. But that begs the question: do you really learn better when you experience things that match your preferred learning style? And I use those air quotes intentionally. For those of you who are just tuning into this for the first time, if you're wondering who I am, I'm Christopher Lind. Professionally, I'm a tech analyst, advisor, and HR exec. On the personal front, I'm a husband and father of 7 young children, and I live my life at the intersection of business, technology, and the human experience. Now, if you're watching this video out of pure curiosity, maybe the cover thumbnail caught your attention, you may be shocked to find out that this question is one of great controversy about, are learning styles real or not? It creates massive controversy and plenty of social media debates that I've encountered over the years. And this very seemingly innocent theory has sparked more heated arguments than I can honestly count, from individuals debating their learning style, their preferred learning style, or learning professionals who jump in from a science and psychology standpoint. So, like the rest of all my content, I thought I would step into the fray in what may be an uncomfortable topic for some folks. So, with this, I want to start by answering the question: what are learning styles? Because I think it's really important to hear at least my framework for what I'm answering when I answer this question. Now, if you're one who has a very strong opinion on the topic, I'm going to ask you to hold your reactions through this part of the video, because this isn't to give my perspective on what this is. So if you hear me going, what are learning styles, and you're already triggered going, they're not real or whatever, just chill, because this isn't me saying what I think about them. This is me simply saying, if you hear the term learning styles, what are most people talking about? Because what I find is some people use that phrase and they don't really mean what that phrase means to a lot of people. So let's talk about what you typically hear when you hear people talking about learning styles. Traditionally, there are 3 or 4. This is how the theory goes. The first 2 are sometimes combined, and the first 2 are visual and reading and writing. So visual learners, you may have heard of visual learners. Sometimes that's broken out as like actual visual stimuli, and then others break reading and writing. So people who really learn from reading and writing something with language, tied to language. The third or fourth is the auditory. So some people you'll hear, oh, I'm an audible listener. I like to listen to things. Typically, it's people who say that they learn better from listening to stuff. So then you've got the fourth or third, depending on how you're counting this, is the kinesthetic learner. So someone who would say, oh, I learn best by doing. I'm a kinesthetic learner. I have to actively do things. Now, if you're listening to me describe these things, hopefully already on the surface, you're seeing how quickly the idea of a formal, rigid, scientific learning style that can be assigned to you starts to break down. So, for example, is a lecture auditory? What if the lecturer has slides as a visual? Does that change what learning style would be affected by this? What about a video? Is it different if you turn the sound off and you're reading the captions? What if your learning is just more of a comical one, but what if you're learning how to write by listening to someone explain how, while looking at a picture of the words while practicing writing it down? Now, if your head's spinning right now, it should be. That's kind of the point, especially of that almost nonsensical one at the end there, is listen, and by the way, if you're thinking this video is going to go down the path that we're all robots, okay, so some people would have been triggered in the beginning by the implication of me starting to talk about learning styles as if, right, proponing that they're a real thing. Others, though, may have heard this next section and felt the defenses rising, starting to feel that triggering effect, because it can give the impression, and sometimes this is what happens when people get very argumentative about the existence of learning styles, is it can give the impression that people are all robots and we can just all be smashed through a single carbon copy experience. And no matter who goes through that experience, we should get the same output. Every single person put into this universal box, out comes the same. And that's sometimes this polar ends of the spectrum that you often see represented when we start talking about learning styles as a thing. So let's go a little bit further though, then, because, right, I'm not giving my perspective on this yet, but I'm showing you where some of this stuff starts to fall apart and where that also we have to be careful where we go with it. But why does it matter? You might be thinking, who's really cares about this? But it actually does matter a lot. And this is why I wanted to take the time to create a video to go into this, to help us think more deeply about this and recognize the complexity and nuance around what could be a seemingly simple question. Now, in general, it is good, and we should all want to know what's true and accurate. So if you're saying, who cares about this video? Hopefully, some of that's just rooted in the fact that, don't you want to know what's true and accurate so that we can make decisions accordingly? I think the answer to that should be universally yes. I don't often get people who go, I don't really care what's true. I just do whatever I want. But the other reason this matters a lot, and I've seen this having spent an entire career in the education, corporate learning, employee, actually K-12 learning, right? I've been around this a lot. And I'm not sure if anybody who listens or watches this is familiar with the nocebo effect. It's not the placebo effect. You may be familiar with the placebo effect. There's also the nocebo effect, which is when people actually have a negative reaction to something because they believe that whatever it is will cause harm. So it's similar to the placebo effect, but a little bit different in terms of it's almost this more, placebo is more of a positive. You think something good's going to happen, even though you're given something that's completely inert and you have a better outcome. The nocebo effect is you almost have this negative reaction because you believe whatever it is will have this negative effect on you. Now, I will admit it is not an exact parallel to the learning styles discussion, but I've observed similar things happen when it comes to learning styles. And let me explain what I mean by that. There is a real thing that happens when people start to believe that they are scientifically programmed to learn a certain way. They believe in their heart, in their mind, that I am an bleep, bleep, bleep learner, and this is how I learn. And what I have seen over and over and over the years is when people start to believe that, they become less engaged, or they will just straight up stay away from things that they don't believe cater to their scientific learning style. Because they just look at it and go, oh yeah, I don't learn like that. So I'm not going to engage with this. And I remember on more occasions than I can count, where I was either facilitating a class or I was trying to implement some new way of getting people engaged with something. And literally people would go, oh, this won't work for me. I'm a bleepity bleep learner. And literally you would see them shut down on opportunities. And that was so frustrating for me because I knew full well that's not the case. Like you still will learn. Trust me on this one. But it was almost this just, nope, I've already decided that won't happen. And just to give another example of this, if you haven't watched my video on our personality assessments, good or bad, I talk about the fact that this is the nocebo effect is another thing that can happen with this, where people go, oh yeah, I am this way. My personality is this way, as if we're these static mechanical robots that only work in a certain way. And it's just very limiting for people. And when it comes to people actually growing and developing as people and professionals, believing that you're locked into some specific learning style and are incapable of learning in any way other than that, it can be really destructive and people miss out on opportunities. So something that may seem really innocuous and really harm, oh, well, who cares if people think they're a visual learner versus a kinesthetic learner? The implications are a lot larger than you may realize. And that's why it's really important we help people think deeply about this, which is something I think we would all benefit from in a lot of different areas. So then that comes to the point of, so Christopher, what are your thoughts? Are styles real? In short, it depends on how we want to answer this question. Overwhelming research has gone into this, completely debunking the fact that there are these learning styles, the ones that I went through before, okay, visual, auditory, kinesthetic. It's just completely debunked that there is no scientific causation between this person's a visual learner, therefore they learn better when they are presented with this scientific learning style. So if you're asking the question, are people watching this video or listening to it, whatever, are they a blank learner from a purely scientific standpoint? My answer to that would be no. So then the question is, well, so are you saying everybody's the same and that we all learn the same? And I would say it's not quite that simple. And I think that's where I tend to balance the equation of the polar extremes of, well, either everybody's locked into this learning style or no, everybody's the same. We can just do the same thing and everybody will be just fine, which we know. And I think just even from personal experience, we know that's also not true. That if we just put 10 people in a room and shove them through the same experience, we don't get the same outcome. And I think what has happened over the years is because that's what happens, we go, well, then there must be a scientific explanation. And that explanation can be nicely organized into these learning styles, which to me is a vast oversimplification of a very complex problem. So there are individual, situational, cultural, environmental, I mean, you name it. There are factors that come into play. That is why every human being you meet is that human being and that's it. And that's why stereotypes are so dangerous, because you may look at someone and go, oh, they're this. And you go, well, there might be a grain of truth in that. There might be no truth in that. But even if there's a grain of truth, it's incomplete. So there absolutely are factors that come into play. And they're dynamic, which adds to the complexity of this. People are all different and unique, and they have different unique capabilities, unique gifts, unique talents based on experiences, based on a lot of different factors. And as I said before, even the belief that you have a learning style or have a stressful day can then further affect how well you learn or experience something. And I think that's a really important factor, is that the static nature that is often represented by learning styles is actually probably one of the most dangerous, because the fluidic nature of just human experience makes it extremely difficult to nail someone down. It's like nailing Jello to a wall and going, you learn like this. Well, is it Tuesday or Wednesday, or what did I eat for breakfast, or what conversation did I have with my spouse this morning before I went to work? What is my current workload? How did that last meet? There are so many factors that just show people aren't static. And whatever you want to call it, style, preference, tendency, like whatever, it can change on a dime. And that can be overwhelming and terrifying if you're someone who's trying to shape learning. And it can be overwhelming if you're an individual going, okay, well, I just want to learn. Like, so how do I even get my arms around this? So there's a bajillion different pathways for everyone. And that, like I said, is overwhelming on an individual level. That's also overwhelming as I think about my peers and people I work with in the corporate space, business leaders who are trying to figure out, okay, I need people to get better at this. So how do I teach them if what you're telling me is there's a bajillion different ways all these people are going to learn, and I don't, like, how's that even possible? Can we really personalize to that level? Now, what I would say is it might be more achievable than you think, but definitely not in the way that most people are thinking. And that's one of the things that I see regularly that sometimes I get frustrated with, is that the way people often approach personalization, I look at it and go, well, that's not sustainable or scalable, or it's not really effective. And in many ways, some of the things that we're trying to do just weren't possible before, but that game is changing. The other thing that I would say before I really get into it is there are consistencies. And I'm going to highlight two of them that I think are really important to consider as we think about this. Because while I may say there's a bajillion different ways things could go, and the way the wind is blowing may affect things that night, or the position of the moon in the sky could also affect things, there are some things that you can go, hey, but I can at least ground myself in knowing this. One of them, let's take for instance, is the Dunning-Kruger effect. If you take a look at this, this is a consistent path that people tend to follow. And as they acquire new knowledge, they have this overwhelming surge of confidence in their abilities that then completely crashes. And it takes a while to build it back up. So we know this, and this is a consistent pattern that we can see in people. So we should prepare for this. And as an individual, you should be prepared for this. I'll talk about this from a learner and as a developer. So we'll break this down, but this is consistent in people. They get new knowledge. I know everything there is to know. I could take on the world. I'm a master of my trade. And then the rubber hits the road and you learn the hard way, and it sends you down below the level you were at before. So boom, I'm super excited. Oh, that went really bad. I guess I know absolutely nothing. And then over time, you grow back up. That is a consistency that you can see in time. People learn new things. They're overconfident and dumb. They make massive mistakes. And then we need to be there to catch them and then carry them back up. So you as an individual can know that. That's a consistent pattern about things. And I'll give an example of this, okay? Here's a humorous example of this. Right, my wife and I, when we moved into the house we live in right now, we bit off more than we can chew, because we thought, you know what? We've learned enough about home renovations. We've YouTubed some things. We've done some research. I'm pretty sure we can do this. Dunning-Kruger effect. Overconfident in our abilities. I'm pretty sure we can figure this on our own. Get into the house. Start laying new wood floors. Crashed through the floor. What did we sign up for? We're completely incompetent. We're incapable. This is the worst decision we've ever made in our life, right? The apocalypse is here. You're just in sackcloth and ashes. Then we pushed ourselves forward, and over time, we figured out our mistakes. We learned from them. We built our confidence back up, but it was a level of confidence that was more realistic to what we actually knew. And that's just an example, and I can probably give you 10 more about our home improvement projects. But that's a real life example of how this tends to work, and it's a consistency you see in as people learn. This is what happens with folks. Another one with this is that everyone needs broad and deep knowledge. You cannot learn without broad and deep knowledge. You need both. You need to know the breadth and the depth of something. Now, does everybody need to go to the same depth? No. Does everybody need to go to the same breadth? No. But there has to be a healthy mix of wide and deep in your knowledge on a certain thing. That is consistent for everybody. You also need to be able to apply it. Anybody who says, oh, I can learn things without doing it, I don't ever have to apply it and I will become a master. No, you can't. No, you can't. That is consistent. You need to do things. So if you run into people who think they're subject matter experts at things and you find out they've never actually done it, they're not a subject matter expert. I don't care how many books they've read, how many videos they've watched, how many libraries they've consumed. If they haven't done it, there's a level of skill. And again, the Dunning-Kruger effect, I will just tell you right now, that initial climb, if you don't have the application piece, you will just keep climbing up that thing. And I will tell you, the higher you climb, the harder you fall. So that is just a consistency that you can see in things. So really, and again, well, I'm not going to get into the how because that's the next part, but that's something that's consistent. You need deep and wide knowledge. You need opportunity to apply it so that you can have that crash. You need feedback on that, because if you don't, you're left to guess and figure out what happened and what went wrong. So you need input on that, because you don't have the ability to see things objectively. You need others around you to provide feedback and see the things that you didn't see, have the insights you didn't have a diverse perspective on what that is. And diverse feedback is an important one. It's not just about getting feedback. It's about seeking out that diverse feedback, because you need that to help you see things from different angles, which goes back to the broad and deep knowledge. If you only have shallow feedback, your depth and breadth of knowledge is going to be very shallow, and that's not a healthy place to be. But you also need to have a healthy dose of reflection and deep thought. You need to have that internal, intrinsic, you need to process that. You can't just keep running on the treadmill, having somebody coaching you, and you're just going, 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 going. You actually need time to process and think through things. That is consistent. Okay. And a phrase that I've heard in the past that I think really sits with this is practice doesn't make perfect. In fact, and this is, I think, one of the things you really need to be careful of, because if you miss any of these steps, you can get the idea that, well, just practice makes perfect. If I just keep learning and keep doing, I'll get better. Well, maybe not. In fact, you may be reinforcing complete garbage. And I've seen this over the years where people either they skip some of these steps. They're like, well, I'll just keep doing, I'll keep practicing, and eventually I'll get better. Well, no, take my golf swing, right? When I was getting coached on my golf swing, had I just kept swinging at the ball and watching the ball go and going, yeah, I think I'm getting better at it. And if I just hit enough balls, I'll get better. Might I have? Yeah, but it actually took my coach to go, the way you're standing is actually contributing to this. And if you're not careful, you're going to train your muscles to swing based on that. And it's actually going to cause damage to you. And I had to actually think about that and go through, okay, like, how's this going to work? So again, don't assume that just doing something will make you better at it. And I think going back to this Dunning-Kruger piece, everyone can grow. Okay? If you keep repeating, everyone will grow, even if your own path and pace is unique. And I think that, again, is a consistency that we should reinforce with people, that oftentimes we find people in this comparison where we're looking at others and going, well, I'm not progressing the way they are, or I'm not as far as they are, or they seem to be doing better at this. And it's like, well, yes, because going back to what I said before, there's a bajillion different factors contributing to that. Some people have more natural talent in a certain area than you do. Okay. But what is consistent is that everyone can progress. The idea that, well, I can't, and that's what bothers me so much when people get locked into learning styles, is it's this fixed mindset of, I can't get beyond this. But yes, you can. What is consistent about learning is anyone and everyone can get better at something. Now, whether it's worth it or not, well, that you have to evaluate. You need to weigh, is getting better at this, the time, energy. I mean, after what I just shared, the Dunning-Kruger, working your way through that, building deep and wide knowledge, practicing, getting feedback, and reflect. We don't all need to be fantastic at everything. So yes, you do need to make trade-offs and go, all right, ultimately, I don't need to go this deep. And to give an example of where I had to make this decision for myself, if you know anything about me, my background initially, everyone thought I was going to go into tech. I got into it and quickly realized this is not, I'm good at it. I have the natural capability. It comes easily. I don't enjoy it. I don't see myself spending the rest of my life doing this type of a thing. There's something about this technology that I think really jives, but the becoming a fantastic coder and software engineer ain't going to work for me. And so I made the conscious decision to say, I'm not going to learn past this level. I'm only going to go to this level, and that's where I'm going to stop. And that was a conscious decision. And I think sometimes we can have this pressure or this feeling like, well, we should just keep learning about absolutely everything. And my experience has been, it's not sustainable, because the thing with learning is you're either growing, you're either atrophying, or you're growing. And that's the thing, is you let it stagnate, you're dying. And so it's one of these like, well, how many things do you really want to keep moving forward? And everybody's capacity is different. Some people, we all know them. We all know those folks that are like, it just seems like they can just consume and learn like a million. I can barely keep my hands on the rails over here. It's okay. That's fine. But what is consistent is anybody who wants to can learn and get better at something. Okay. So where does that leave us though? Because you might be going, all right, fair point. Got it. Hopefully I've convinced you. So as an individual, if you're trying to learn something, what should you take away from this video? First of all, one goes back to what I just said before. You need to prioritize. Not everything is equal. And it's possible to overlearn where you can actually, so not only do you have this factor of you can learn so much stuff that you never use, it just starts to atrophy and die. But the other thing is you can get to a point where you go, I'm just learning. So I can't keep growing that muscle. And you start having these diminishing returns of what really am I gaining from doing this? So then how do I move this into cruise control to make sure it's not atrophying, but I'm not continuing to drive deeper and deeper? And I find myself continually having to evaluate that and going, I think I've reached that skill, knowledge capability where I need to keep my pulse on it to keep up, but I don't want to go much deeper than this because based on my priorities, it's not really important. And if it's really important, what I will say though, is make sure you're defining an outcome. Not everything you learn needs to have one. I think sometimes that's a mistake that can overwhelm people as they feel like I need to have this clear desired outcome for everything I learn. No, you don't. There's some things you can just learn because you want to learn something new. Maybe you'll learn it and it'll atrophy and you'll go, the lesson learned was I learned how to do it and decided it wasn't really all that important to me. And that was the lesson. Great. Do you need to sit and nail down some tangible business quantifiable outcome for everything you learn? No. But if it's something that's really important, you should. Because the reality is, if you've seen from what I've said before, learning is hard work. And if you don't have a desired outcome, you run the risk of working really hard and not even knowing if you're making progress, or just giving up because you don't even know if you're making progress to a goal. And that's one of the things. Learning is a marathon. It's not a sprint. Going to the styles thing, though, what I encourage people of, go with what works for you. I understand. And you know what? That's going to change based on the day. There are certain days that I want to just listen to a podcast. There are other days I can't listen to it without having something visual keeping my attention because I'm distracted. And so I need to watch something that's other times I would listen to and it'd be no big deal. So go with what works and what's available is my recommendation. That's the beauty of where things are going. We can personalize as much as possible. So go with what works for you. However, do not write something off simply because you believe you don't think it's going to work. You are missing out on opportunities. And I have seen this happen time and time again where people go, and a good example, a really good example of this, okay, is there are a lot of people who believe I can't learn virtually. This is still, despite COVID and all of the remote work and everything, there are still a lot of people I encounter who go, I just don't really learn well virtually. You are limiting your opportunities by believing that. And the reality is it's not true. I can tell you from designing and running extraordinary virtual digital programs, you absolutely can learn as effectively in the digital age as you can in the analog age. It's totally possible. Now, granted, I will get people who will give me the feedback and go, no, see, I did this thing and it sucked. Yeah, I bet it did. I bet that was a sucky experience, but don't blame the medium for the experience that whoever created that was. So just be careful with that because you may be missing real accessible opportunities simply because you believe something that's not to be true. And like I said, that's just a prime example that I see happen all the time, but I've seen it. Oh, well, I don't learn well like this. I don't engage well with this. Give things a try. And if ultimately the experience isn't for you, fine, but don't write off the whole medium. The other thing I would encourage anybody is find that community because learning really is a team sport. Like I said, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of hard work. It can be overwhelming. It can be discouraging because you can feel like you're not getting as far. Do you need to have a community for everything, similar to prioritization or nailing down an outcome? No, you don't need to. This is where I see people get overwhelmed. They feel like they've got to be in a cohort or a community. Perhaps you don't. For the things that are important that you care deeply about, I would highly encourage people find that community of people with a shared vested interest in what you're learning so that you can be there to support each other along. I get that's not, and what community looks like may be different for everybody. Maybe that's one other person. For some people, it might be a group of 50. I don't know. But bottom line is find somebody else who can be with you in that journey. The last one that I just see happen way, 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 way too much is don't, well, I got two more. Don't over-index on the knowledge aspect. This is a huge mistake, and it's one that happens all too often. If knowledge is in your head, but it's not in your hands, you are far less prepared than you think. And this goes back to the Dunning-Kruger effect. If you haven't done it, your confidence compared to your capability is not in line. And so I would encourage anybody, if you've made it this far in the video or you're catching this point, if there's something you think you know really well, but you haven't done it, before you pour into more knowledge, I would encourage you to find opportunities to put what you think you know into practice. Because as I said earlier, the more knowledge you build without the application, the higher you climb on that Dunning-Kruger curve, and the harder the crash is going to be. And that crash can be extremely painful and can actually prevent you from wanting to get back on the bike. And so I would encourage everybody, whatever it is you're learning, and again, prioritize. Do you need to actively learn everything? No, there are things you can learn about and go, I probably don't need to know. A good example of this, there's a lot of stuff I know about medical and health conditions because my kids and I watch a lot of things related to health, immune system, like how your body works, all this stuff. Do I need to go do scientific research and study into this and practice? No, because I recognize I'm not trying to be a subject matter expert on this. But did it come in handy the other day when I went to the ENT and he was rattling off a bunch of stuff and I went, okay, I don't know all the details of how that works, but what you said makes sense to me. Yes. And now that's where I'm saying it's important to make sure that you're not over indexing on knowledge, especially on things that you actually know are really important to you for whatever reason. So if you either have a new goal, make sure you're building application early on. The earlier you bring, the lower that Dunning-Kruger curve is. And the flatter, flatten the curve. Don't go all, pandemic on me here, but flattening that curve will improve your learning journey. And that is, again, a consistency. The sooner you find opportunities to apply, the flatter you can make that curve and the less likely you are to create this huge overconfidence index that's going to lead to a massive crash. The last thing for an individual is make sure you are intentional about making time to reflect and think critically on whatever it is. In the digital world, it is so easy to get wrapped up doing things. We're just busy. We're doing this. I'm consuming the next thing. I'm on to the next. I'm running over here. I'm doing this and that. We don't ever take time to stop and process and think. And again, evaluate and learn and reflect. We need more time to do that. And that's something that everybody should be doing as part of their learning journey, regardless of what it is. And honestly, this is one that, regardless of how deep you're looking at going, I would encourage everybody to build time in. Even if it's something where you're just doing a light knowledge application, you just want to build your knowledge set a little bit. Make sure you're building some time to go, yeah, but let me actually think about that. Where does that play in? How does that affect my life so that I can make the most of this knowledge that I just acquired, type of a thing. Okay, so this last section is for the folks who are developers of learning or practitioners, people. This might not just be learning practitioners. You could be a business leader. You could be a manager of a team going, I am responsible, which, by the way, even more so to that audience. If you are a manager of a team, you are a talent developer. You are a leader of learning. If you're a business leader, you are a leader of learning. If you're a parent, you are a leader of learning. So don't think this is just teachers and corporate learning professionals. This is literally anybody who is shepherding anyone else. So for those of you who may feel overwhelmed going, that is a lot to take in and a lot to consider, what I would say is leverage the snot out of the technology that is available to us now and design as much as humanly possible for personalized experience. I'm not talking styles, okay? To be clear, I remember the days, and I have seen this on more occasions, where I've seen learning leaders go and they say, I'm building this learning and I'm going to do it in 3 ways for the 3 different. I'm building an auditory track, a kinesthetic. That is not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is recognizing that technology is allowing us to reach people where they are and understand where they are. And even without technology, there are ways that we can do this by setting a knowledge foundation and saying, you know what, part of the design is going to be more about active discussion and problem solving, where we're building into our engine room for critical thinking and reflection and practice and diverse feedback. You can do that without technology. What technology can do is can then accelerate and enable that at a speed and scale that wasn't possible before. And it can also reach people in ways that just weren't possible. As an example, translation is now becoming so ubiquitous in terms of what AI can do. We can now reach people and not go, you have to learn this in English. Sorry, it's not your first language. Sorry, you don't speak to anyone in English, but we're going to force you through that because we don't have the time and resources to make it in your native tongue. Well, if you're a designer or you're someone who's overseeing this, you now have the ability to do that. And if you're, let's say, a manager or a business leader looking at something for people, you should be asking those questions of, hey, maybe I've got a diverse team from around the globe. Am I asking to make sure that whatever solution I'm looking at can easily accommodate people's native languages? Because anymore, it should be able to. If it's not, they aren't leveraging the capabilities. Uh, Using multiple mediums is great. A good example of this is my live stream. I live stream it so that it's reaching people where they are on social in that active moment. I put it on YouTube so they can consume it later, put it on a podcast so that people can listen to it if that's how they would prefer in the day. Maybe some people sometimes catch the live stream, then they want to listen to it late. I don't know. But technology is allowing me to do that very easily. It's not a lot of work for me to create multiple modalities that allow people to consume things based on whatever. And again, this isn't about learning styles. Maybe it's just today I happen to be on a 2-hour drive, not connected to the internet other than my phone. I'm going to listen to a podcast because I'm driving. I'm not going to watch a video. Is that a learning style? No, it has to do with situational circumstances that make this modality more consumable for somebody. And technology is allowing us to do this in so many ways that is so much easier. But the biggest thing is make sure you're being realistic about what you can build and sustain. So if you aren't super familiar with the latest in tech and all these other things, it can be easy. And that goes back to why it drove me nuts when I would see organizations build the same learning thing and they'd go, we're making an audio, a kinesthetic, and a visual version of it. And it was like, how are you going to maintain that how are you even going to deliver that in 3 different ways? I mean, it wasn't built with scale versus my example of my podcast. You can listen to it live because I just hit stream and it streams. You can watch it on YouTube later if you want because it's streamed to that destination and there's a live replay. And I download and publish it as a podcast. It takes 2 minutes. It's not an excessive amount of work and it's scalable for me to do. So those are the kinds of things to make sure you're doing everything you can to personalize it, reach people where they are. I would encourage anybody who's looking at this to stay current, relevant, and most importantly, consumer grade. I think sometimes we have this idea that learning has to be this cold, sterile corporate environment. But, while I may get a good laugh if I go back and watch a 1990s Laserdisc that at the time cost $50,000 in its time, I'm probably not even going to play it. And I'm going to be more focused on just the sheer ridiculousness of the style and the trends that were happening then. And so sometimes I see this happen where people aren't keeping things up to date and they're spending so much investment on the front end that they don't have time to sustain and maintain it. And they're trying to get more out of it than really there ever was designed for it. So make sure you're staying current. You're doing whatever you can. Thankfully, technology is making this so much easier. I even look at some of the content I create. I recognize some of it is going to be outdated a couple months after I create it, but I'm using tools that allow me to do it quickly, stay relevant, and make it easily accessible by putting it where people are. And you know what? It's disposable. If I need to, I can get rid of it. No hurt, no foul. And as leaders responsible for developing others, that's a really important thing. And I think tech is doing a great job of making disposable learning more feasible, which is important because things are changing at a pace we've never seen before. Now, I said before, for individuals, you can be nuanced in whether you define a desired outcome when it comes to learning. For people designing or preparing learning interventions for others, that's not an option. You don't get to go, well, I didn't really get around to defining an outcome. So if you're choosing to learn for yourself, not having an outcome, if it's something that's just marginally important to you, not a big deal. If you're taking the time and energy and asking people to participate in something, you better darn well make sure you are focused on what are we hoping to get out of this, for two reasons. One, you're asking people to commit time and attention and energy, which by now, hopefully you understand, there's a lot of time and energy and attention that goes into learning. You're asking people to commit that to something. So if you're going to ask that from others, you better have a good reason to do it so that they can weigh, okay, this is what I'm going to get out of this. But the other reason would be you need to be careful that you don't get hung up on the way in which people go through that pathway. Going back to setting up this whole conversation on learning styles, preferences, blah, 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 whatever you want to call it. Too often I see people get focused on, but I want people to walk this path through. And it's like, if you focus on the outcome, you should be less concerned about which pathway they take to get there. If they can get to the outcome, great. And this is where sometimes our own we get a little too personally vested in this. And it's, one of these like, but I spent so much time building all this, or I constructed this pathway. I really want to make sure everybody gets it. Well, that's not the right way to do it. Be focused on the outcome, design the resources. And that's why I think disposable learning is so important, because you can go, I'm not too worried. If I make this video and I have this desired outcome and not everybody watches every ounce of this video, do I care? No, so long as they can do what I want them to do on the other side of it. But in order for that to happen, people need to know what's expected of them. And I think this is sometimes where I see learning solutions break down, is people aren't really sure what's expected. It wasn't really ever mapped. People get over-indexed on wanting people to go through the way they designed it. And so you end up with this really inefficient, non-user-friendly experience. Instead of saying, here's what I really need you to accomplish. Here's what you should be able to accomplish by the end of this. I have created this portfolio of resources that are mapped to the journey, so that if you're getting stuck, if you're stuck in the mud, you can look and go, oh, that'll help me out of this. But if somebody gets through that mud hole and is just fine, don't drag them back into the mud and be like, no, 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 no. You shouldn't have gone through there. I need you back here because you didn't use this. No, people need it. Let them do it. Let them get to the pathway that they need. And then that way you can give them the freedom to get there. You can show them the destination they need to arrive at, provide them all the milestones and stop checkpoints along the way. But then don't be too concerned about how many checkpoints and milestones did they stop at. Yes, you can be concerned to know, well, boy, I guess in the future, we maybe don't need to waste a bunch of time on this since 0 people found it important. But it shouldn't be about, oh man, like we need to go back and make everybody go through it. And I understand how it happens. I've been a designer. I've been a creator of learning my entire life. I get you care deeply about this. I think about these videos. I care deeply about the content I create. Do I wish everyone found as much value in it as I did in creating it, and that they consumed every aspect of it? Yeah, of course I do, but most people won't. And I've accepted that. And I've learned over the years to accept that. And I think we are better designers and developers of talent when we recognize just because something's critically important to me doesn't mean it has to be critically important to everyone else, so long as we can all get there. If they get there, that's what matters. And that's the most important component. The other thing too is just chill out. If you're designing and you're trying to do some of this stuff, my kind of closing words to those who are responsible for creating and managing the learning of others, just relax. What you create or deliver, honestly, when you think about all the external factors that I talked about, has a relatively small impact on the overall learning of an individual. The idea that what I created is going to be the 90% share of what makes somebody learn something, it's just not realistic. Now, I would encourage people not to get discouraged by that and throw in the towel and go, oh, well, then what does it matter? Well, it matters. It matters because it's going to matter to someone. For me, if I create something and even one person gets benefit from it, that's one person who benefited from it. Now, obviously, I have to weigh time and scale and my availability to do things. But if one person did it, then it was worth it. But at the end of the day, I don't see people struggling with that so much as I see people getting major stressed out because they think, well, what I did should be getting more lift or it should be going further. Well, maybe it doesn't because that's just the complexity and the nuance of learning. So, with that, this was far more than a quick answer on our learning style is a real thing. But like many things, I feel like there's so much more value in going into the depth and complexity of the human experience and what it means. And the more we understand and the more we think on it, the more we can actually do meaningful work. So, thank you all for listening, watching, whatever the heck you did to consume this. I hope you have a great one, and we will see you on the other side.